You're just a checkbook to me. You always have been." The words hung in the air between us like smoke, and I watched my son's face as he said them, not flinching, not apologetic, but satisfied, as if he'd been holding that sentence in his mouth for years and finally decided to swallow the last of his restraint. Something inside me went completely still. Not broken, not yet, but something fundamental shifted, the way a foundation cracks before a building begins to settle. I had been a father for 36 years. 36 years of school plays and soccer games and emergency room visits at 2 in the morning. 36 years of being the man my son could call when his car broke down in the middle of nowhere, when his first business venture failed, when he couldn't make his mortgage, and in the space of 5 words, Marcus had reduced all of it to a transaction. I didn't respond right away. I simply looked at him, this man who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long drives home from his grandmother's house, and I made a decision so quietly that he probably didn't even notice it forming behind my manned eyes. It had started the way these things often do. With coffee and an unstated agenda, Marcus had called on a Tuesday morning asking if he could stop by. His voice had that particular lightness he always used when he needed something, a tone I'd been hearing since he was old enough to want things beyond what his allowance could cover. "Claire and the kids were fine," he said. "Just thought it would be good to see me." He arrived around 10, and I had already brewed a full pot because I knew we'd be sitting at the kitchen table for a while. My kitchen table had seen a lot of difficult conversations over the years. My wife, Patricia, had died 14 months earlier, and since then that table had become the place where the weight of things landed. Marcus looked tired. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, and there were shadows under his eyes that reminded me uncomfortably of his mother in her last months. I noticed, but I didn't say anything. I'd learned early in fatherhood that pointing out how someone looks usually closes the conversation before it opens. He talked for a while about the kids. Lily was 7 now, doing well in school, obsessed with horses. Ethan had just turned 4 and was, apparently, a menace with a vocabulary. I smiled at the right moments. I missed those kids with a particular ache that I hadn't expected retirement to bring. Then the real conversation began. "Things have been tight, Dad." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Tighter than I've been letting on." I waited. I knew this part. "The contractor business hasn't been what we thought it would be this year. Inflation hit the supply costs hard. And Claire's been putting in fewer hours at the salon because Ethan needs, childcare is just..." He trailed off, looking at the table. "How far behind are you?" He told me. The numbers were worse than I expected. 2 months on the mortgage, 1 month on the truck payment, a credit card balance that had been growing for the better part of a year. I kept my face neutral while I ran calculations in my head. Patricia and I had been careful people. We'd saved well, invested modestly, lived without extravagance. I had enough to help. I had helped before, many times, though I was beginning to understand that Marcus might not have the full picture of how many times, or how much. "I think what might help," I said carefully, "is if we actually sat down and looked at where the money is going each month. Made a real budget. Sometimes when you can see it all on paper." Marcus looked up at me, and something shifted in his expression. "Dad, I'm just saying, it's a useful exercise. We have a budget." His voice had an edge I didn't expect. "We're not 22 years old. We know what a budget is. I'm sure you do. I'm just suggesting that sometimes there are places where small adjustments..." He laughed, but it wasn't warm. "That's what you think this is? A small adjustment problem?" I set my mug down. "Marcus, I'm not criticizing you. I'm trying to help. You know what would help? Actually helping. Not sitting across the table from me like I'm one of your project managers and telling me to optimize my spending." I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't expected to feel in this conversation. A warning. "I understand you're under a lot of stress. You don't understand anything about it." He stood up, moving to the window, and his shoulders were rigid. "You've never had to struggle, Dad. Not really. You had a career that paid well from the beginning. You had Mom handling everything at home. You had it easy, and you never let either of us forget how responsible and successful you were." "That's not fair." "No, He turned around, and the look on his face was something I hadn't seen directed at me since he was a teenager and furious about a curfew. Except this was worse. This was something older and more settled. You want to know what's not fair? Getting called twice a week to hear about how Patricia and I should be tracking our grocery spending while my kids are eating cereal for dinner some nights because I can't make ends meet. I never called twice a week to discuss. You know what Claire calls your advice? She calls it the Sunday sermon, because it always comes with a lesson attached. Always. Like we're still children and you're still handing out the rules of the house. The air in the kitchen felt different now, thicker. I didn't realize that's how she saw it. That's how we both see it. His voice was rising, and the tiredness in his face had been replaced by something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been waiting for this pressure valve to open. You show up with the check in one hand and the lecture in the other, and somehow you act surprised when we're not grateful enough, when we're not falling all over ourselves thanking you. I've never asked for gratitude. Then why does it always feel like a performance review? I stood up. Slowly, the way I'd learned to move in difficult moments, not to signal aggression, but to signal that the ground had changed. Marcus, I've given you and Claire a significant amount of financial support over the past several years. Because I love you, and because that's what family does, and because your mother would have wanted. Don't. His voice cracked. Don't use Mom to make your point. I'm not using her. I'm reminding you of the context. The context. He laughed again, that same hollow sound. The context is that you missed half my childhood. You know that, right? You were on the road or in the office or at some conference for half of my actual childhood. Mom was the one who showed up to everything. Mom was the one who knew my teachers' names and my friends' parents and what grade I was in. You knew my quarterly performance metrics. That landed differently than the other things. Because there was truth in it, or at least the shape of truth. I had worked long hours. I had missed things. I had believed at the time that providing financially was a form of presence. And I had been wrong about that, in ways I'd come to understand only later, only after Patricia sat me down one evening and explained it to me with more grace than I deserved. You're right that I wasn't always present the way I should have been, I said. That's something I've carried for a long time. But Marcus, that doesn't... You owe me. The words came out flat and final. You owe me for every school play you missed and every weekend you were in Phoenix or Atlanta or wherever the hell it was. And now you're retired and you've got time and money and you show up wanting to be Father of the Year, and I'm supposed to just what? Forget all of it and be grateful for the help you're finally giving? That's not what this is. Then what is it? He stepped closer, and his voice dropped to something cold. What is it, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man trying to buy his way into a relationship he never bothered to build. I said nothing for a moment. I let the silence do what silence does. You want to know the truth? He wasn't stopping. I could see it, that same look I'd seen in Jessica's eyes, in the story I'd heard somewhere. That particular expression of someone who has sharpened a blade and finally decided to use it. You want to know what Claire and I talk about when you're not around? Marcus, we talk about how you think money fixes everything. How you wrote a check after Mom's funeral like that was the appropriate response to grief. How every time we accept help from you, we have to sit through the debrief afterward. We talk about how you've been trying to purchase a relationship with your grandchildren because you know that you don't actually have one yet. His voice had gone very quiet. You're just a checkbook to me. You always have been. The room went still. I looked at my son, this man I had rocked to sleep, this man I had taught to drive, this man I had stood beside at a graveside 14 months ago when we both couldn't speak, and I understood something with sudden, crystalline clarity. He meant it. I walked to the counter and picked up my coffee mug, set it in the sink, turned the water on briefly, then off. Methodical, the kind of movement that gives your hands something to do while your mind catches up to what your gut already knows. All right, I said. Marcus blinked. He'd expected something else. Argument, defense, maybe tears. All right, he repeated. You've made your position clear. I turned to face him. You've been carrying this for a long time. I appreciate you finally saying it out loud. Dad, I'm not your dad. The words surprised even me as they came out. But once they were in the air, They felt accurate. According to what you just told me, I'm a checkbook, a transaction. So let me be accurate about that going forward. He stared at me. I walked to my desk in the corner of the living room, opened the top drawer where I kept a small notebook, the kind Patricia had always teased me about, old-fashioned in an age of everything digital. I sat down and began writing. What are you doing? Accounting, I said, since that's the nature of our relationship. Mortgage assistance after the 2021 interest rate adjustment. $1,800 a month, 22 months. Ethan's daycare for the first year. The emergency fund after Marcus's truck transmission blew out on the highway. The loan that became a gift after his first contracting venture folded. Patricia's birthday money that had quietly become grocery money 3 of the last 4 years. Christmas gifts for the children. The payment I'd made directly to their landlord before they bought the house because they were 2 months behind and Claire hadn't wanted to tell Marcus. I tore the page out and set it on the table. Marcus looked at it. His face had gone pale in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child and had done something he knew was genuinely wrong. That's what a checkbook looks like, I said. Paid in full, balance now 0. Dad, I told you, don't call me that. I said it evenly, without anger. You made the terms clear. I'm just honoring them. I walked to the front door and held it open. Marcus stood at my kitchen table looking at the piece of paper like it was a foreign object. He didn't move for a long moment. You can't just go home, Marcus. I kept my voice quiet. Go home and talk to Claire about what comes next, because from here on out, what comes next is yours to figure out. He left. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a full minute, listening to the sound of his truck backing out of the driveway. Then I went and sat in the chair. Patricia had always called my chair the one by the window where the afternoon light came in, and I let myself feel all of it at once. The first person to call was Claire. She called within 40 minutes of Marcus leaving, which told me he'd called her from the driveway before he'd even made it to the end of the street. Walter. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was managing something. Marcus told me you two had a rough conversation. Did he tell you what he said? A pause. He told me you got upset about some comments he made. He told you I got upset. He said things got heated, and he said you showed him some kind of list and told him you were done helping. He's really shaken, Walter. He didn't mean Claire. I said her name with the weight of 14 years of watching her and Marcus together. Before you continue, I want to ask you something. Do you know what he said to me today? Silence. Word for word. Do you know what your husband said to his father this morning? He said he was frustrated. About the money stuff and about feeling like there were always strings. He told me I was just a checkbook to him. That I'd always been a checkbook to him. That the financial help I've been giving your family was not generosity, but a debt I owe for being absent when he was a child. I paused. Did he tell you that part? The silence stretched long enough to answer the question. He was venting, she said finally. He didn't mean it literally. People generally mean it when they've been thinking about it long enough to say it with that kind of certainty. Walter, please. The kids need Lily has been asking about you. She asks about you every week. Whatever happened between you and Marcus, those children love you. I love those children. My voice stayed level. That hasn't changed. But what Marcus said today was not a moment of frustration. It was a statement of how he actually sees our relationship. And I spent his entire childhood being told I wasn't present enough. I'm not going to spend my retirement being told I'm not a real father, only a source of funds, while simultaneously being expected to provide those funds. This is an overreaction. Good night, Claire. The neighborhood had a way of noticing things. My neighbor Don, who'd lived across the street for 20 years, was outside with his dog the following morning when I went to get the paper. He gave me the look that meant he'd seen Marcus's truck in the driveway the day before and had registered that it left in under an hour. Everything all right? Don asked. Working through some things, I said. He nodded and didn't push, which was why I'd always liked him. The one who did push was my sister Barbara, who called on Thursday after Claire had apparently reached out to her. Barbara and I had always been close. She was 4 years older than me, and believed that this gave her permanent advisory authority over my life decisions. Walter, you cannot cut off your son over a fight. It wasn't a fight, whatever it was. He's your son. And those kids need their grandfather. Barbara. I sat down in my chair. I'm going to tell you exactly what Marcus said to me, and I want you to really listen before you tell me how to respond. I told her. All of it. The checkbook comment, the debt framing, the calculation behind it. The way he'd said it, not in rage, but in the cool, settled tone of someone delivering a verdict they'd already written. Barbara was quiet for a long time after I finished. She started, then stopped. That's a hard thing to hear. It was, but Walter, he's struggling. People say things when they're cornered. He wasn't cornered. He was sitting at my kitchen table accepting a cup of coffee I poured for him while coming to ask for more money. That's not cornered. That's comfortable enough to finally say what you actually think. You don't know that it's what he actually... Barbara. My voice came out sharper than I intended. If someone you'd loved and sacrificed for looked you in the eyes and said you had always been just a transaction to them, could you look past that? Really? Or would you be telling me right now how important it is to protect the relationship? Another long pause. Then, quietly, I'd probably do what you did. Thank you. I still think you should talk to him again. When he's ready to have an honest conversation, I'll be here. The weeks that followed were strange. I am not by nature an idle man. I had projects, the woodworking shop I'd set up in the garage after retiring, a standing Tuesday morning coffee with Don and 2 other neighbors, a volunteer commitment at the library 2 afternoons a week. I had built a life around Patricia's absence that was functional, if not entirely full. But there was a particular silence now where Marcus and the grandchildren had been, and I'd be dishonest if I said I didn't feel it. Tom Halsey, who had been my accountant for 15 years, called me about an unrelated matter, and I ended up telling him the story over the phone more or less in full. Tom was the kind of man who listened to everything before speaking. When I finished, he said, "The thing about what he said, calling you a checkbook, is that it tells you what he believed the relationship was built on. And that came from somewhere. I know it came from somewhere. Did you know he thought that before Tuesday? I considered this for longer than I expected to. I think I suspected something like it, but I thought it was grief. Patricia kept things running between us in a way I didn't fully appreciate until she was gone. She was the interpreter." "Exactly. So, without her," Tom said carefully, "there was no one softening the translation." That sat with me for several days. It was true. Patricia had always been the one who made Marcus and me legible to each other. She'd relay things, reframe things, smooth the rough edges off both of us before we got in the same room. And when she died, we'd lost that translation layer. What was left was just the 2 of us, unmediated. And apparently what Marcus had accumulated without that mediation was a resentment so organized it had its own financial accounting. It was Marcus who came to the door first. And then, 6 weeks after that kitchen conversation, someone else came. I was in the garage, working on a rocking chair I'd been building since the spring, when I heard the knock at the side door. When I opened it, Claire was standing on my porch alone. She looked different from the last time I'd seen her at Christmas dinner, definitely, and something in her eyes that wasn't quite defeat but was close to it. "He doesn't know I'm here," she said. I stepped back and let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table, always the same table, and she was quiet for a long time after I set tea in front of her. I waited. I had learned that waiting was often the most useful thing. "The mortgage company called. Yesterday," she said finally. "We have 30 days. I'm sorry to hear that. Walter, I need you to understand something." She looked up at me, and her eyes were very clear, the kind of clear that comes after you've been crying long enough to get past the blur. "I didn't know. About what Marcus said to you, not the way he said it. He told me you'd had a fight about money, and that he'd said some things he regretted. He made it sound like you'd both gotten heated, and it went both ways. It didn't go both ways. I know that now, because I've been pushing him on it for weeks, and the story has kept changing." Her hands tightened around the mug. "First it was that you'd called him irresponsible, and he'd defended himself. Then it was that you'd brought up your past work travel, and that triggered him. And last week he told me a third version where apparently you'd said some things about our parenting that crossed a line." "Did he tell you the checkbook version?" She shook her head. Not until 3 days ago, when I found a text on his phone. I waited. He'd texted his friend Derek the morning of the day he came to see you. Before he came, she said it carefully, like someone walking across uncertain ground. It said, and I looked at it twice, because I needed to be sure it said, "Going to see the old man today. Going to put it on the table once and for all. If he's going to keep making us feel like charity cases every time he helps, I'm going to make sure he understands what he actually owes us. Better for everyone if we're honest about what this relationship is." The kitchen was very quiet. "He planned it," she said. "Yes. He went to your house planning to say that. Planning to call you a checkbook. Not because he was overwhelmed and it slipped out. Because she stopped, pressed her fingers against her lips. Because he decided it was time to establish leverage. The word landed between us with considerable weight. "What kind of leverage?" I asked, though I thought I already understood. I think he thought that if he laid it all out, the guilt you carry about his childhood, the absent years, he thought you'd absorb it and keep helping because you'd feel too guilty not to. He said something to me a few weeks before that day, something I didn't understand at the time. He said, "There's no way he cuts us off. He can't. He's got too much to make up for." I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "He miscalculated," I said. "Completely." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Walter, I want you to know that I did not encourage this. I did not know this was the plan. I would not have." Her voice broke slightly. "I would not have let him do that to you. Whatever problems exist in this family, you have been good to us. You've been more than good to us. And you've been a wonderful grandfather to my children." "I know you didn't plan it with him, Claire." She looked surprised. "How?" "Because if you'd been involved, the story he told you afterward would have been consistent. People who plan together keep their story straight. You had 3 different versions because he was managing you the same way he was managing the neighbors and managing me, telling everyone the version that served him best." The color drained slightly from her face as the implication settled. "He's been doing that for a long time, hasn't he?" I said it gently. Not as an accusation, but as an honest question. She was quiet for a very long time. Long enough that I thought she might not answer. Then, longer than I realized. The Saturday meeting had not been my idea. It was Claire's. She called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if I would be willing to sit down with both of them, a real conversation. No agendas, no attorneys. She said she'd spoken to Marcus and that he had agreed, though she said it in a way that made me think the agreement had not been immediate or uncomplicated. They arrived together, which surprised me. I'd half expected Marcus to appear alone, having convinced Claire to stay home. But they both came, and they sat on the couch across from my chair, and for the first few moments, no one spoke. Marcus looked like he'd aged 6 months. There was something different about his posture, a caving inward that I recognized as the particular collapse of someone who has been running a performance and finally run out of energy to maintain it. "You wanted to talk," I said to him. He looked at his hands. "Claire thought we should. What do you think?" A pause. "I think I made a mistake. Tell me about the text to Derek." His head came up fast. Claire's expression was steady, confirming that this wasn't a surprise to her, that she'd told him this was coming. "She showed you?" She told me. In the interest of the honesty that's apparently been missing, Marcus rubbed his face with both hands. "I was angry. You texted that before you came here. You weren't angry yet. You hadn't seen me. I was angry about the situation, about always feeling like..." He stopped, started again. "I've been telling myself a story for a long time, about your work years and what that took from me. And I've been telling that story so much that it stopped being something I felt and started being something I calculated with." I looked at my son carefully. This was different from what I'd expected. This had the sound of a man who had been cornered into honesty and found, somewhere in the process, that honesty was actually lighter than the alternative. "The debt framing," I said. "That's what it became." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "I convinced myself that the money you'd been giving us wasn't generosity, that it was, I don't know, restitution. And once I thought about it that way, it was easy to be resentful instead of grateful. Easy to feel like I was owed more." He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Something young and ashamed and very, very tired. I wanted to push you into a corner where the guilt would make you give more without questioning. And I thought that if I made it clear that I saw through the performance of good Father Walter, I thought you'd flinch, give in, keep paying. And instead, Claire said quietly from beside him, and instead you agreed with me. His voice broke slightly at the edges. You just agreed, and walked away. And I realized that I'd played the only card I had, and it turned out not to be a card at all. It was a match. I let that sit in the air for a moment. Marcus, I said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to think about it before you answer. He nodded. When your mother was alive and she translated between us, handled the parts that were rough, did you know that's what was happening? Or did you think our relationship was actually that smooth on its own? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think I knew. I think I always knew she was the one holding it together. And after she died, when it fell apart as fast as it did, I told myself that was your fault. That you'd never actually built anything real with me and Mom had just been papering over the gap. He exhaled slowly. But that's not, he stopped. Say it. That's not entirely honest either. Because I didn't try very hard either. After she was gone, I was grieving and I was scared about the money, and it was easier to have a reason to be angry at you than to just be sad and lost. He looked at his hands again. It was easier to call you a checkbook than to admit I didn't know how to talk to my father without my mother in the room. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, not exactly, but the recognition of something true. What happened with Derek? I asked. Marcus blinked. What do you mean? The text. Did he respond? Did he think the plan was a good idea? A shadow crossed Marcus's face. He told me I was going to blow up the best safety net I had. He said I was making a mistake. A short, humorless laugh. He was right. He sounds like a better friend than you deserved in that moment. He is. Claire had been quiet through all of this. Her hands folded in her lap, watching her husband with an expression I could only describe as re-evaluation. Like someone seeing a familiar landscape from a different altitude and discovering the contours were not what she'd thought. 30 days on the mortgage, I said. Marcus nodded. I'm not going to fix that, I said. Not because I don't love you, and not because I'm punishing you, but because you need to understand that the financial arrangement we had was based on a relationship I believed was genuine, and that relationship, the one where I was just a checkbook, cannot be the foundation for any more of my retirement savings. I paused. You understand why? Yes. There are things I'm willing to do. I reached for my own mug. I'll continue to be Lily and Ethan's grandfather in every way that matters. That doesn't change. Those children had nothing to do with this. And they're not going to lose access to me because of decisions you made. But that's between me and them, not me and you. Marcus looked like he might say something, then didn't. Beyond that, I continued, if you want to rebuild something real here, not a transaction, not a performance, just two people who used to be a father and son and might be able to be that again, then I'm open to it. But it starts from zero, not from debt, not from resentment, not from guilt, from zero. I looked at him steadily, and it will be slow, because trust that's been deliberately calculated against doesn't come back in a single Saturday afternoon. The silence that followed was not the hard silence of before. It was something more fragile, more honest. Okay, Marcus said. It was barely a word, more like an exhale. Okay, I said. Claire reached over and took Marcus's hand, and he let her, and I saw something pass between them that I didn't quite have access to, some renegotiation happening in the language married people develop over years together. I didn't try to read it. That part was theirs. There's a thing they don't tell you about the moment after a difficult truth has been spoken and acknowledged. They tell you it will feel like relief, like resolution, like the clean air after a storm. And sometimes it does. But sometimes it just feels quiet, ordinary. Like a room after the furniture has been rearranged, familiar enough that you know where you are, strange enough that you have to relearn how to move through it. I was in the garage 2 days after that Saturday meeting, fitting a joint on the rocking chair, when Marcus knocked on the side door again. Alone this time. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place down the road that he knew I liked. He set one on my workbench without saying anything. I kept working. He watched for a while, the way he used to when he was a boy, and curious about what I was making, but not quite ready to ask. "Is that for Lily?" he said finally, nodding at the chair. "Was thinking about it," I said. "She'd lose her mind over that." "I know." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "Can I help?" I looked at him, this tired, complicated, sometimes foolish man who was still, underneath everything. My son and I handed him a piece of sandpaper. "Start on the back rail," I said. "Smooth strokes. With the grain, not against it." He took the sandpaper, crouched down beside the chair, started working. We didn't talk about the mortgage, or the truck, or the 30 days, or what came after that. We didn't talk about the text to Derek, or the 3 different versions of the story he'd told, or the word checkbook, and what it had cost both of us. We just worked, side by side in my garage on a Tuesday morning, the way we almost had a handful of times when he was young before something always pulled one of us away. It wasn't resolution. It wasn't even forgiveness. Not yet, not fully. But it was a start. And maybe slow, uncertain, built on something more honest than anything we'd had before, that was enough to begin.